Hi, I'm Dr. Justin Ezekowitz. I'm a cardiologist at the Mazankowski Alberta Heart Institute, and I'm also a professor of medicine at the University of Alberta. I'm co-director of the Canadian Vigor Centre, and I'm also the director of cardiovascular research at the University of Alberta. My big role that I do in my clinical practice is taking care of patients with end-stage heart disease called heart failure, but I also take care of patients with routine heart disease, such as after a heart attack or other heart rhythm problems. In my research practice, which is the way I spend most of my life, I'm really interested in doing clinical trials around patients with heart failure, or just being involved in clinical trials overall in terms of how do we do them, what are the methods, and how do we conduct these large, difficult to sometimes do clinical trials. My other role in research is that I have been deeply interested in the real-world evidence, such as population health or administrative health databases, machine learning, and AI, and looking at how we look at outcomes for patients with heart disease. Overall, I think heart disease research is, of course, to me, very fascinating, and I find it pretty compelling every day to try to answer a new or different question. It's challenging for sure, because like most research, it's filled with tons of failures and some successes. We learn a ton from our failures because that's how we drive our hypotheses further. It's like all things in science or medicine, they are driven by experimentation and having a good hypothesis and a good question, and then being able to test that in a data set or a patient population. One of the things that's really nice about the type of research I get to do is I work with a great team of people, the researchers, and so that's everything from statisticians to operational project leads to study coordinators, and a ton of great collaborators from around the world. When we're working with our collaborators from around the world, they do bring a different perspective and often are incredibly passionate about their work, and we can support it here locally, or alternatively, we can be a good collaborator in their work wherever it might take them. Conversely, they are also very helpful in forming our research and how it shapes up to be. One of the other nice parts about doing clinical research is I get to interact with patients on a different level. So I get to care for them clinically often, but also get to let them and help them and have them volunteer their time to participate in research projects that we're doing locally as a site. And that's very rewarding to see them participate in their volunteer spirit. One of the things that's more challenging about clinical research is it's less well controlled. So we have to accommodate patient schedules because they're free-living adults, and that makes it a bit more challenging than mice in a cage or a cell in a petri dish. All the things in science are important, but it just means that humans are sometimes a bit more challenging to coordinate and organize, and also convince to be part of research. The nice part is when they do participate, it's really meaningful, the type of work we are able to do in terms of introducing a new therapy for our heart disease or changing our perspective on how we treat patients. So should we continue doing this practice we've been doing for 30 or 50 years, or should we bring along some new evidence to the field? The nice part about doing clinical research is also that the trainees I get exposed to, in terms of either clinical trainees or PhD or master's students, really do drive some of my thought forward, because they often ask the question why or how or any of those types of questions, and that challenges us to really think about, what are we studying and what are the questions we're asking or thinking about. Now, in terms of the general advice I give to all people that want to collaborate with me, or trainees especially, is that science is you got to be in it for the long game. You need the best training possible for sure. The challenge with that is we often are facing, do we want to do a master's or PhD or this course or that course, or do another additional thing on top of what I'm doing? It really is the best thing to do is to get the best possible training all the way through, and then your path will open up based on that expertise you've developed, and you can bring something to the table that many of us don't have. And so I always challenge myself to ask my trainees to take courses that will help them educate me on something that I have maybe not mastered, or maybe that they can teach me a thing or two about the science we're doing. The other nice part about doing courses or other training that may broaden your mind is it may also open up your opportunities for doing other work around in the field. And so that's something to consider, is that you don't quite always know the path you're going to take in life, and so being able to be willing to explore things in a different way is quite important. In terms of cardiovascular health, it's quite important to us overall. The one thing that we are unfortunately in a neck and neck tie with is cancer for the death and disability. And we can look at that in a number of different ways, but the globally leading causes for death and disability are cancer and cardiovascular disease. The nice part about cardiovascular disease is that many of the factors are modifiable. So we can understand the genetics, so we can understand the new therapies, but many of the things we do around cardiovascular disease and the prevention are, we actually have a lot of things we can modify. Smoking, cholesterol management, high blood pressure management, to name a few, getting more exercise, eating a good diet, all those things that seemingly kind of are innocuous in our life are actually quite important. Now, I deal with the other end of the spectrum, the patients with heart failure, so end-stage heart disease. So they've developed something along the way for either from one of those many underlying etiologies or something that has happened to them. But we can often modify their course by often months or more likely years with the new therapies. So we can pick up where, unfortunately, prevention wasn't able to complete its task. The nice thing about that is we also can open up some insight to how can we prevent this from happening to another patient. And to me, that's really going to be fundamentally important in the next 10, 20, and 50 years, is really prevention is going to be the key for cardiovascular disease. And it's highly modifiable, not just in Canada, but globally. As a lot of the countries in lower income or middle income countries make a transition to high income countries, they develop the same non-communicable diseases that are prevalent in, say, Canada or Europe or United States. We need to be ready for that wave of patients who are coming across our doorsteps with cardiovascular disease, which will affect millions and hundreds of millions of people. I find cardiovascular disease quite fascinating. The physiology, the underlying cells are quite important. The way that it affects the human body is quite important. The outcomes that are preventable, the treatments we have. I mean, it all is pretty cool and pretty exciting. Most importantly, though, when we get to interact with a patient with a therapy and say this therapy will be able to reduce your chances of dying or being hospitalized, to me that's quite rewarding. And so from a researcher perspective, I like to see that develop, and from a clinician perspective, I like to see that be applied. So we're excited about cardiovascular disease, and I hope you are too. And thanks for listening to me on this video. Thank you.